Okay, hello everyone. We'll kick off now. I think we've still got a few people just coming in, but we'll get started with the intro. So welcome to today's Purple 365 webinar, Living with an Autism Diagnosis Later in Life. We're holding this today in recognition of World Autism Awareness Month, which is this April. So today's session will be hosted by our Head of Business Partnerships, Charlene Overend. And we're also joined by two fantastic guests today. So we have Debbie Hannum, who's a support talks and training officer at Pact for Autism, and they are a Harlow-based charity. And we're also joined by Catherine Knowles, who is the managing director at Cura Insurance, and she's going to be sharing her lived experience of being diagnosed with autism as an adult. So just some housekeeping bits. So for those of you who are Purple 365 subscribers, the session is being recorded and will be shared with you all after the event, as well as the bite-sized version of the session. Captions are also enabled for the session, so if you'd like to see these, you can turn them on. I think just in the bottom tab on your Zoom view, you can select to turn on captions. And we'll also leave some time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions at all throughout the session for either Debbie or Catherine, you can pop these into either the chat or Q&A function, and we'll pick these up at the end of the session. So I'll now hand over to Charlene for an overview.
Thank you, Lauren. So this April, we continue to spread awareness, promote acceptance, and ignite change for our autistic friends, family, and colleagues. It is really important that we create these opportunities to increase understanding and acceptance of people with autism so that we can foster worldwide support. And today we are doing just that. We have a packed session. Firstly, as Lauren has said, we have Debbie, who is going to help us better understand autism as a difference and how we can create more autism-friendly environments. And then we will have a chat with Catherine about her lived experience of autism diagnosis later in life as an adult. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to you, Debbie.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to close my windows down a little bit so I can just see no one. Yes, so thank you very much. Really lovely to know that you're all out there this afternoon. So my name's Debbie from Pact for Autism. Our information is on one of the first slides. If you want to get in touch with us, feel free to use that information. Thanks, Lauren. So why am I here? So I've never been to university to learn about autism. I am neurotypical, and my knowledge comes from my son. My son is now 23, and he was diagnosed at 2.5. And so along with like-minded parents, we started Pact about 17 years ago because there wasn't any support in our local area. And as you'll probably find out, so I'm very passionate about talking to anybody when it comes to autism. And I found really true friendships in the autistic community. We started supporting adults about just before lockdown, actually. And I have learnt so much, more than I ever did from professionals. Thanks, Lauren. So this is my lovely son, Luke. He's autistic. He also has epilepsy. He's now 23. And my experience with him has always been about how he's taught me. He can't always communicate in the same way as we would communicate, but he does a really fine job of echolalia and scripting. So he uses borrowed language from the TV, from films, and I think that's an incredible thing to do. Thanks, Lauren. So this is from Purple, some facts and some stats. Autism refers to a broad range of conditions characterised by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviour, speech and non-verbal communication. And actually it's interesting about the non-verbal communication. There are a lot of autistic individuals out there that choose not to use verbal communication but do have an absolute lot to say. So always be listening. Autism is mostly commonly diagnosed in childhood, and again, later on, I'm going to show you some statistics of adults who have been diagnosed later on in life. 1 in 67 people in the UK are autistic, but many adults have never been diagnosed. My eldest son is self-diagnosed, doesn't want to go down that pathway of having an assessment done. And 7 in 10 autistic people have challenges with mental health. Thank you. So I just wanted to briefly run this past you. If you go onto the Gov website, you'll be able to see the full Autism Act that was passed in 2005. Although there is this legislation there, it's still incredibly frustrating for autistic individuals that their needs aren't being met. And this is the only disability that has its own legislation. So please have a look at this in a little bit more detail. Thanks, Lauren. Terminology is key. When Luke was first diagnosed, Luke had autism, but since listening to the autistic community, they want to be known as being autistic. A person on the spectrum is autistic. There are the negative terminologies. High function and low function I will come to in a little bit more detail. Saying that everyone is a little bit autistic is a definite no-no. But the most important thing is to remember to ask the person that you're either working with or supporting, you know, how do they prefer to be described? Thank you. So about 7 years ago, the word neurodiversity came to light. And I think this is a really lovely way, especially with young children who are struggling with their diagnosis because they have a condition or a disorder. But actually, if they're neurodiverse, you know, how positive is that? You just have a different viewpoint. Your brain sees things differently. You experience and interact and interpret the world differently. I think that is such a lovely way of looking at it. Thank you, Lauren. So if we go to the medical model to start with, and if you look under the NHS site, what is autism? It's all about deficits. It's all about what a person can't do and what they struggle with. And that's what I'd like to do today. And that's what I'd like, I think, for all of us to do today, is look at autism as a difference and try to look at it as a positive. Thank you, Lauren. So if we look at the medical model, the autism spectrum is an impairment, a continuum of impairment. You're either mild, high functioning Asperger's, severe, low functioning, or classically autistic. And actually, this doesn't tell you anything about an individual. It just labels, it just puts them on a line. And what I'd like to share with you today is how we can support differently than just having that. Because actually, although Luke would have been diagnosed as low functioning, he doesn't sit at that end all the time. And I have a colleague that I do talks with who was diagnosed as high functioning, and she doesn't sit there the whole time. Thanks, Lauren. So let's come to these function labels. So today, autism is put into 3 different categories. High functioning, which is a level 1, refers to an autistic individual who appear to have mild symptoms that don't interfere too much with work, school, or relationships. Labelling a person high functioning dismisses their struggles. And I've spoken to lots of adults who have very strong language skills. They have jobs, but there are times when all of that goes away and they can't even answer a phone or use their phone, and they shut down. So giving them a high functioning label, it really dismisses the struggles that they have. And on the flip side of that, low functioning, say level 2 or 3, refers to an autistic individual who has severe symptoms that appear to significantly interfere with work, school, and relationships. Labelling a person low functioning dismisses their abilities. So this is where we come to Luke. Although Luke finds it really not so much difficult to have a conversation, it just doesn't work for him, because for him it sounds like we're all arguing. But he can speak, I don't know how many languages there are in the world, but he can speak most of them. So he can speak Russian, Norwegian, Welsh. It's all scripting, but he'll come up to me and say something to me in Welsh, and I then have to try and work out what he's asking me. So this dismisses his abilities. And we would never do that to each other. As neurotypicals, we would never say, oh, Charlene's a bit low functioning today. Well, I'm very high functioning. we sort of can laugh at that, but actually we would never do that to ourselves. So why do we do that to our autistic community? Thanks, Lauren. So if we look at a different way of looking at people's support needs, the Autism Will provides information relating to an individual's strengths and challenges. And if we had longer, I would go through this a bit more, but you can have a look online about this. So, for example, you can pinpoint where a person has their strengths and where they have their challenges. And what this gives you is a day-to-day look at a person's day. So Luke will never just stay on the severe end. He will fluctuate day to day. Sometimes he, will be able to be social. Sometimes he can't. One of the things he doesn't do is mask. So he would never mask and try and fit in because that's just not who he is. Thanks, Lauren. So I've plotted one out here, and this is something I use with my autistic colleague. And you can see here that actually some of them look like, one looks like a fish, one looks like a bird, and the other one looks like Lisa Simpson. But actually it just shows where that person's needs are on that day. And this is something you can work with in a work environment, in a school environment, just to plot. And actually these are on the slides and you've got the plane on there. You can have a play with it with your colleagues just to see where you sit. If you want a bit more information on it, I can help you with that. Thanks, Lauren. So let's look at autism as a difference. So there are the areas: communication, social understanding, information, processing information, and sensory. So as human beings, we all do these things, but actually our autistic community do them differently. So you may find that you may have a colleague that has very strong language skills, but they don't want the social input. Come out for a drink afterwards. No, thank you. Oh, come on, you party pooper. All that pressure on somebody when actually they just want to be able to do their job. So respect the fact that somebody says, no, thank you. Being social is something that we, as neurotypicals, crave. Our autistic community don't always, and that's not to say they don't. I know lots of very sociable autistic people, but they do it in their own way, their own time scale. I'll come and be social for half an hour, then I'm gone. Processing of information. There's a lovely video on the National Autistic Society where a young chap says, when you ask me a question, just count to 10 in your head. Give me time to process what you've said. Because as neurotypicals, we use a lot of fillers when we're communicating. Do you know what I mean? All those, I don't know why I went calm. Yeah. Let us, just give a little bit of time to just process that information. And our sensory processing. We are all sensory as human beings, but our autistic community have shown us and told us that their sensory systems are different. So some autistic people can be on high alert. That's their natural state to be. So any noise or light or anything like that can have such an impact on them. Thanks, Lauren. I love this. I was on a talk a while back. I don't know why we do that as neurotypicals. Like, you need to know when the day was. Is that going to make any difference to your life? See, fillers. So social processing differences. So you might have heard of a lady called Temple Grandin. So the autistic brain is her brain, and then we have a neurotypical brain there. And they were showing them social interactions, and they looked on these scans of how much of the brain lit up. And this is why I love this. For so long, we have only seen autism from the outside, and we've made judgments, we've named it, we've done all of those things, and we've always had the say. What is absolutely beautiful and wonderful now is that the autistic community have a voice, and we have to listen to that. So what's wonderful about this is the non-autistic brain, when shown a picture and asked a question, one pathway lights up for the information and it goes out again. The same question and picture to the autistic brain, every single pathway lit up. So we can really see from that how difficult some situations can be, because if every pathway is lit up, I can only imagine what that must feel like and what that looks like. I just think it's a really powerful thing, and I've just stole it. So I was just about to click it then. Thanks, Lauren. So these are some of the things you might have heard or seen when we're talking about autism. So stimming. It's really important that autistic people are allowed to stim, because it's a way of regulating, expressing their emotion. Some autistic people are trying to bring their levels up, and some are trying to bring their levels down. So stimming is really important. So we all stim in a certain amount: clicking your pen, playing with your hair, jumping up and down in your chair, movement. It's all about stimulating. Eye contact. When Luke was very young, I was made to get hold of his face and look at him and get him to make eye contact with me. I wish I'd known back then that actually that was harmful for him. Now, speaking to our autistic community, it's uncomfortable to make eye contact. Actually, making eye contact and listening to you are two of my senses. If you want me to listen, I can't look at you. And it's really interesting. We don't give eye contact as children are taught in school who are autistic. We give fleeting eye contact, natural eye contact. So actually, if somebody isn't looking at you, please don't ever think they're not listening. Lack of empathy. There are so many autistic people that have too much empathy. And they don't show us their empathy in the way that we think you should be shown empathy, because they're not sure how to show it. And a great example of this, Dean Beadle, who is a great speaker, told this story that a husband and wife, the husband came home, neurotypical, and lost his job. The wife was autistic. He told her, lost my job today, and she disappeared for an hour. And he thought, oh, great. What I wanted was a bit of, empathy there. An hour later, she came back down the stairs. She said, I've got your job back. You've got a pay rise. It was unfair dismissal, and your boss has been fired. So she's actually gone and given proper empathy. I'm going to show you that I'm going to do something rather than just pat you on the back. Emotional regulation. Sometimes it's very difficult for our autistic community to manage some of their emotional responses. And face blindness. It has got a long name and I can never say it, so I'm going to say face blindness. So actually there are some children, I've experienced this myself, that only recognise somebody's hair or their glasses. And that's why sometimes you might see a huge meltdown from a child because the secretary has had a haircut or used a different perfume or something. The way they identified that person has suddenly disappeared. Thanks, Lauren. So anxiety, meltdowns and triggers. Autism isn't a mental health condition. However, because of the environment, there is a lot of anxiety that run along with our autistic community. So fight and flight we know about, but freeze, fawn and fib are exactly the same chemical reaction. So if somebody is frozen, they can't speak or can't move. If someone is just saying things that they think you want to hear just to get out of the situation, or they will fib, tell a lie about something just to be able to get out of a situation. Meltdowns are real and are absolutely intense. We sometimes use that term, oh, I had a meltdown today, a little bit flippantly. We don't have meltdowns because the actual meltdown for our autistic community is so intense. Some people would say, oh, they had a tantrum. A tantrum is a social thing to do. Children want something, they have a tantrum, they get what they want, everything's fine. But looking at triggers, my son has absolute triggers. Sometimes it's pain, confusion, or even a word can actually trigger that emotional response. Thank you, Lauren. So change, although some autistic people find change difficult, if change can be given in a way of today we might have something happening, then change can be achieved. Transitioning, my son has difficulty transitioning from his bedroom to the bathroom, so let's not forget that transitions can be small to us. Masking and camouflaging. For so long, females weren't getting the diagnosis as much as boys because females are better at masking. Boys do mask, and they found now that when they're doing assessments for girls, they look at it a little bit differently now. But actually, being made to pretend to be someone all day long is exhausting. And autistic fatigue and burnout isn't just I feel a little bit tired. It can actually wipe a person out for days. Even if that person has done something they love doing, the energy that it takes to be able to go to a social situation or do something they enjoy is just too much, and there is that autistic fatigue afterwards. So as an example, someone was asked, you know, would you please come to dinner with me? Okay, I'll come to dinner with you. And then afterwards they said, well, that was okay. But what they didn't realise is the person had spent a month preparing for that dinner, the autistic person. What am I going to say? What am I going to wear? What will they think of me? What if I say the wrong thing? All the way there. Then on the day, the challenges that comes with, what if I ask them a question and I can't answer that question? Going, ruminating, all of those things that could happen. That's exhausting afterwards. And we must remember that it's not just a little bit tired, you'll get over it. It is absolutely debilitating. Thanks, Lauren. There's a guy called Dr. Luke Bearden, who I absolutely love. He came up with this equation: autism plus environment equals outcome. And that is really true for my son. If his environment is right, his outcomes are brilliant. If we get something slightly wrong for him, then it's volatile. Now you're all sitting there now thinking, how do we control the environment? But actually it's quite easy in some situations, and I'll come on to that in a minute when we look at the workplace. So have a look at that in your environments. Have I got the environment right for this individual? Thank you, Lauren. So as I said, you know, our sensory system, we all have a sensory system. Sight, sound, touch, taste and smell, we know them. But there's also the vestibular system, the proprioception system and the interoception system. So vestibular is in our ears. Are we upside down? Are we up the right way? Proprioception is our body awareness. So you might find that someone is moving a lot on their chair or they hit the desk a lot. That's because they're not sure where they are. So they have to get a bit of feedback into their bodies. And our interoception is what's going on inside. My colleague will say to me, I haven't drunk or eaten anything all day because I've been really concentrating on something, and I haven't had the message to say that you are thirsty or hungry. My son is the opposite. He is constantly hungry. He doesn't know when he's full until he's sick. So it's really important. I think you've probably all heard this before, but the lights, strip lights, they flicker and they hum the whole time, they buzz. And we can only hear that when they're about to blow. We suddenly start seeing them flicker. But our autistic community have said to us, they can hear that all the time. Smells, someone getting too close, touching them when they don't want to be touched. All of those things are really, really important to get their sensory system. So if we look at somebody's sensory profile, that helps the environment. Thank you, Lauren. Executive functioning is a part of the brain about getting things done. So our executive functioning, we can sometimes experience this. You know those days when you pick the milk up and you put it in a glass and then you put your orange juice on your cereal? Those days when you just think, what on earth did I do that for? That's when that part of our brain is dysfunctioning. A lot of adults that I've spoken to have said that this is a real area for them, a key area, because people think they're lazy, when actually they're just not very good at monitoring themselves or organising themselves, or actually the ability to start and finish a task. Sometimes some reasonable adjustments can be put in place to enable that person just to remember what that task is. Understanding that our working memory is that throughout our lives we do something, say driving, And how many of you will go on a car journey now and go, I don't remember driving. That's because we've got it. Our brain just knows what to do. But sometimes if it dysfunctions, we forget. How do I drive? How do I do that? What do I have to do? So executive function is a really big thing. Again, that's like another whole hour on a presentation, but can speak to you at a different time. Thank you, Lauren. So a lot of the time with young children and adults, we see behaviour first. So people will say, you know, autistic behaviours, but what is a behaviour telling us? Thanks, Lauren. So it definitely has a function. And a lot of the time there is that communication. I can't get my need met, so I'm actually going to give a behaviour. An example of Luke, when he was in secondary school, was taken to assembly, and his language was coming on, but it wasn't a natural language. So he turned to his learning support assistant and said, LSU, which is the learning support unit. And she said, no, we have to stay in assembly. So he thought about it and he thought, hang on, I've missed a word out, surely. Oh, and I didn't look at her. Looked at her, LSU, please? She said, no. And so he slapped her around the face. And what did she do? She took him by the hand and marched him out of assembly. So for him, he'd done the right thing, what he thought was the right thing of asking, and didn't get his need met because his environment was wrong at that point. So what's the quickest way to get out of assembly or out of a classroom into a quiet place? I'll smack you. And that's how. So we really have to listen to our young people, that communication isn't the first thing that they can use. So triggers, difficulty in processing information, unstructured time. This is an area where a lot of autistic people will say, if someone's late, I don't know what to do with that time. Sensory, changing, physical, all of those things. Luke can react and get quite volatile when he's got pain. And so what were we seeing? So outbursts, physical or verbal, stimming, ignoring, defensiveness, or avoiding and shutting down. Thank you, Lauren. And I saw this once, and I do like stealing things, which I think are brilliant. So this is really important. We know our frontal lobe is our executive brain. So it problem solves. It can look at a situation and say, oh, I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. And then we have our emotional brain, which is our amygdala, which is our fight or flight. We also have our primitive brain. So this is where we started off as cave people. This part of the brain distrusts. It's all about survival for me, myself, and I'm going to win at all costs. But actually, it hijacks the rest of the brain. So even though the executive brain, that frontal lobe, is bigger, the primitive brain can sometimes speak a little bit louder. So this is where difficulties can happen. And then you might see those behaviours. Thank you, Lauren. These are some of the things that autistic people have spoken to me about. You know, behaviours are not a choice. I'm not choosing a behaviour. Task avoidance, you know, something, if there's the idea that I could get this wrong, I'm not going to start it. Games must be played my way. And I think it's really important to find those games that there's not a winner or a loser, because that's really difficult, especially if a young person is in their primitive brain. See me as an individual, not as all autistic people react the same way. And this one I think is really important. I've learned to play the piano. Why do I need to keep practicing? Luke's like that when he was playing chess. I've learned to play chess. I beat you. Let's move on. Thanks, Lauren. Processing of information. This is a little video I'm just going to show you quickly of Luke and how he processed some information that I asked him. I was doing a talk for Essex Police and they said, does Luke know where he lives? And I panicked a bit thinking, oh my God. So I started telling him every day his address. So you're going to hear my address. If you want to come around for a cup of tea, very welcome. Thanks, Lauren, if you'd like to show the video.
Nearly ready.
Where do you live?
No, where do you live? No. Nowhere.
Where do you live?
Train to London.
you tell me where you live?
Go!
So what I love about that is that, to start with, he reacted. So I could have reacted back, but he then went, you could see him processing. Where's that bit of information he's asking me? I know I've put it somewhere, and then he finds it. And I love that. And it took him about 10 seconds to find that piece of information. Just before I finish, this is something I saw on social media, which I absolutely love. This is from an autistic individual. How many times do autistic people get asked, you don't look autistic, we're all a little bit autistic. I'm sorry, a doctor said that to me once. I said, well, Luke's autistic, just to give him the, we might not be able to get this appointment done as the way you want it to do. And he put his pen down and said, I'm really sorry. So you can have a look at these. And I think, the positives, thank you for telling me, how can I support you? Is there anything I need to know? All of those kind of things I think are really important. Again, you're going to get these slides so you can look at that. Yes, I think you literally, a question just came up. Yes, you'll get these slides. Thank you, Lauren. So looking at changes in the workplace, I think it's sometimes employers think it's a big change that has to be made, but actually asking the individual, how does it work for you? Like this new hot desking doesn't work for some autistic people. They need to know where they're going to sit. And actually having a workplace that is autism friendly works for everybody, because there will be people that either don't know they're autistic or don't want to tell anyone they're autistic, haven't had the assessment done. So actually, let's talk to each other as individuals and say, how does this work for you? Thank you, Lauren. And I've got a list on my next one of the possible changes that you can put in place. And this happens not just in the workplace, but also in schools, in families. Never make assumptions, always ask if you can. Be consistent with your communication. Keep instructions short and manageable. We've spoken about processing time. Provide structure and routine if it's needed. And if you are having meetings, keep to the agenda. Us neurotypicals, we go in and we talk about the weather for 5 minutes, but actually that's not on the agenda. Keep things short and on track. If you can use visuals and they work for the individual, use those. I can't see the bottom of these, Lauren. But actually, you are going to get these, so you'll be able to see the full slide. And again, I think it's really important to actually speak to the individual and ask them what makes them comfortable and what works for them. Thank you, Lauren. Obviously, this is only a short presentation. So these are 2 websites that have some really in-depth information about employment and what you can put in place. Thank you, Lauren. And these are some books that I find really helpful. Dr. Luke Bearden, he does some brilliant books. And Is That Clear is written by autistic individuals as well. So it's about getting that knowledge and that understanding. Thank you, Lauren. And I'm now going to hand back to Charlene, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that helpful.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was really, really useful. And I've learnt loads, and I've taken a lot of notes myself, and that I'm going to embrace into my everyday life moving forward. I thought it was really, really brilliant. First of all, I just want to apologise if there was a little bit of a murmur with your speaker sometimes throughout that, Debbie. So I don't know what happened there, but apologise to anybody who did have a little bit of difficulty hearing some of the stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to now open up a conversation with Catherine, and Catherine has been friends of ours at Purple for a while, and professionally through her organisation Cura Insurance, and so it's really, I'm really loving the opportunity, Catherine, to speak to you now from a more personal level, and hearing your story. around your autism diagnosis. So let's start there. So when were you diagnosed and at what age, Catherine?
Okay, I do apologise for the puppy in the background, which I'm sure many of you can potentially hear. He's having a moment. He might soon start running around and zooming. So I was diagnosed last September, and at the age of 36. And I noticed that somebody, somebody asked the cost in the bottom about potentially the price of a private diagnosis, and I went for private diagnosis because I needed to have an answer. And it was bound to happen, wasn't it? Apologies, everybody. And I went for private diagnosis, and I'd approached the NHS at the same time. I've still not heard back from the NHS about any kind of response. And within 2 months, I had my diagnosis privately. It did cost about, I think it was about £1,500 to get a private diagnosis for it. So in terms of me, I've always wondered if I'm going to say different. I hope that if some of the terminology I use doesn't offend anybody. I'm still very used to getting new and used to the different terminologies that are used, but I've always just felt that I was not the same as everybody else. I definitely didn't cope very well at secondary school. I didn't understand all the girls. I just didn't understand them. I didn't understand all the cliques. I didn't understand all the nastiness that you can sometimes get with teenage girls, and I would just be like, you know what, I just don't want to, I'm going over here, I'm just going to leave you all over, that kind of thing. It was very isolating. And I've always had, I was making some notes about different things as well that would be typically not classed as, you know, autistic, like an empathy thing. You know, people think, oh, they can't be empathetic. I'm too empathetic, so I really, really struggle. As examples, obviously, we're all seeing things at the moment in the news which are very upsetting, and hearing things. And so right now, and probably since very early on in COVID, so for a few years, I can't watch the news. I just cannot watch it. I can read about it, but I can't watch it. I can't see videos. I can't see pictures, because if I see them, I always think of it as that I've got lots of routes going on at the same time in my mind. And one of the routes is then constantly playing that thing. So unfortunately, earlier I saw an image of someone that had been hurt in Ukraine, a young child, and that picture is now in my brain constantly, just in my brain at the side, and alongside that is my 3 young children. And what is potentially, so the catastrophic thinking is just going on and on and on and on, and that's kind of like playing in the background. And there's certain, obviously, definitely things that had happened to me, so like the sensory overloads. I'm massively sensitive to smells, hugely sensitive to smells, to the point that I have my own business, and we live at the seaside up in the northeast. And one of the things that I have done for many years is I've banned anybody from having fish and chips in the office. They are not allowed, they're not happy, but they do really enjoy days when I'm not in the office, like today, because then they'll suddenly get a round of fish and chips, all of them. They're like, yes, she's not in. But it's obviously really lovely as well that they're very respectful of that. But you know, I've had it before where I've sat in theatre and someone sat in front of me with very strong perfume, and I was just immediately sick. There was just no way of controlling it, which is obviously incredibly embarrassing. But, you know, people aren't always going to know that, you know, and obviously know there's going to be someone near them who's so sensitive. And for me, my diagnosis was 2 things. Felt it as freeing, and I also was angry, because when I got over the anger quite quick, but when I was 20, so 16 years before my diagnosis, I'd had a really high oversensory event, and obviously had no idea about all this, and it ended up that I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I had a couple of bouts of agoraphobia, and I went to see a psychologist, and I said, I think I maybe have Asperger's. You know, at the time, that was kind of like in my head in terms of terminology. At that time, I was like, I think, and they just laughed, and she was like, no, you don't. And she didn't even check. She didn't do any tests or anything. And it's something that stayed with me forever, because of the fact that I don't understand social interactions at work. I don't understand them socially as well. You know, I have core friends, but I don't have massive groups. And I see people with massive groups of friends, and I don't understand it. And I had somebody that I spoke to earlier, and she'd just had a hen party. And some people were doing things there where it wasn't really it wasn't, the focus wasn't on her, it was on someone else. And I was like, oh, I couldn't cope with that, because I would have been like, not in a too blunt way, hopefully, but I'd be like, excuse me, it's my hen party, you know, kind of thing. Let's make sure it's about me. And you can have all the other days, but, you know, and that can sometimes get me into a little bit of trouble, because I will just, if I see an injustice, maybe put it that way, I have to say it. So I know I've kind of gone on a very long thing about that, and I'll let you focus me on another question, Shane. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, no, and that's really, really insightful. And I'm watching the chat coming through here, and there is lots of other people in the room, the virtual room, that can relate to what you've said. So that is fantastic. And obviously you have built up your tool bag, shall I say, of how you coped during, you know, during your life growing up pre-diagnosis. Yeah. And I'm just interested, has anything changed since? Have you been able to adopt different approaches because you've been diagnosed, or are you approaching things in the same way?
Kind of yes and no, and I was going to say it's kind of been positive and kind of negative at the same time, because especially because I had a private diagnosis as well. I don't know what it's like if you go through the NHS, but I literally had my diagnosis and then that's it. There's been no follow-up or anything. So I'm now involved with a company who is actually going to do sensory profiling with me and really help me to understand myself. But yeah, I found that when I'd first been diagnosed, there was some new people had joined our company, and as I was doing some things, my mind is very logical and I see lots of patterns. So if there's somebody suggests a project, I will go down 20 or so routes very, very quickly, and I'll realize which ones aren't going to work, which one will, and I'll say we need to do this. And I don't realize that I need to step back and go, everybody else hasn't done that journey yet, and I need to explain why we've done that journey or not, which is, it's really difficult socially. In terms of actually getting the job done, it's really, really helpful. But what I was finding is I was doing these mind maps, because I'm very visual, very artistic as well. And I was just like, so if I'm doing this and you can't follow me, if I'm going too fast, I'm not meaning to be condescending by saying I'm going too fast, I'm autistic, I might do this and everything. And what was really lovely is this person who'd started just turned around to me, she goes, you know, it's okay. And she was like, it's all right. And it don't worry. And if you do, I will just say, I'm not sure how you've gone down that route. Can you explain it to me? And it was so, so nice. So for me, it was a positive outcome. But in terms of me personally, I also felt it was a bit of a negative, because I felt like I was having to suddenly apologize all the time of like, oh, I'm being so strange. I must be so strange because in the past, doing this has got me into trouble because people haven't followed me and have thought I've just been, you know, taking over and being too bossy. But in terms of me generally, I think it's been really positive, because I've obviously lived the last 16 years thinking I have mental health. And for me, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but for me and how I internalize that, that's meant for me that my brain's weak. And that's not the case with mental health. And please don't anybody think that I'm suggesting that in the slightest. It's just that's how I felt about myself. And what's lovely is that I've been able to go, no, it's not. It's because I'm autistic. The world isn't specifically designed to, and I'm not designed for the way that the world is right now. I tried to get help and I was knocked back. That's not my fault. That's not my brain being weak. That's just somebody not taking the time to professionally really look after me. And that was when I got the angry bit about it. I was like 16 years of thinking, 16 years of mental health just because somebody's not paid attention. But for me, it's like, you know, I've got 3 kids. They are 10, 7 and 4. My house is noisy. I used to be able to do things where I could remember conversations, like my memory of things. Like I'll be able to say to you, right, well, we were having this conversation, right? I was sat in this position, you were sat in that position. I was wearing this, you were wearing that. We said this, you said that. And I used to be able to do that. And like now, because I've got the kids, I feel like my brain's just gone to mush. And I've got so much information coming in just purely from the kids. I don't feel like I can process anything else. And now I'm actually saying to myself, you know what? When you're all screaming and asking me, and one of you stops talking, and then the other one starts and doing this, I actually need you to give me 10 minutes. I'm going to put some headphones on. I'm going to listen to some music. And the kids now actually really respect the fact that, you know what, mum just needs 10 minutes. That's all I ask for, 10 minutes, just to try and recenter myself. So for me, it's been an incredibly positive thing. There has been some things that surprised me that I felt personally internally for me a bit negative, but overall, I'm very, very happy to have had the diagnosis done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds, and that mechanism that you have introduced with your children, where you've said, which I probably need to do myself, to be fair, it isn't stop, give me 10 minutes to process and then come back to you.
Yeah.
Has that been a new approach since your diagnosis that you've introduced?
Yes, because before I just felt that I wasn't being good enough as a mum. And it was a case of, I'm not balancing work and mum stuff right, because by the time I'm home from work, I'm shattered. When I'm with the kids, I'm shattered, which means I'm then shattered for work. And then I just always used to think the kids just need, and sometimes I'd just be there and I wouldn't scream out or anything, but I would just almost just sob, just like a really loud kind of wail in some ways. And I'd think to myself, this isn't healthy, this isn't right, I shouldn't be doing this to the kids. And obviously I was blaming my mental health the entire time. And now it's a case of, no, it's not my mental health. It's the fact that I've got all these different all these different roots in my head that are going at once. There's work, there's this, there's that, there's this project at work, all the different projects at work, and then all the different things with the kids. Yeah. And it's just too much sometimes, especially if you just don't get that opportunity to put everything in line. And with the kids, obviously, you know, as soon as a kid speaks, your mind just goes blank because you're like, the kid must need me, you know, kind of thing. So then you restart every single time. And it's just like, I've just not even had a chance. And then you get really frustrated because it's just like, I need to put things in order. So it's,
that's really, really helpful. And I think, you know, these coping strategies that you've been able to implement since diagnosis has helped you sort of formulate what's going to work well for you, because you're looking at it differently. You're looking at it through the lens of autism rather than looking at it through the lens of mental health. So I think that's absolutely important. And so if we were looking at, let's look at you as a customer, Catherine. Since diagnosis and pre-diagnosis, did you struggle or did you have challenges from a customer perspective because of how you, how you were coping and how you now cope since diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not been loads of opportunities post-diagnosis with everything's going on to test some things out, but I really struggle on public transport. I don't like the feeling of being trapped or the fact that I might be somewhere and then what I'm expecting to change. So I've definitely had difficulties at train stations, at airports, and that's something that at some point I'm going to need to try and face again. And it's strange because obviously they've not been part of my regular routine, you know, for a lot of the time. So it's trying to get that back in. And you know, as Debbie was saying, in terms of anxiety and stuff, that is a huge thing. And like, it's building yourself up because it's gonna be up for months. You know, it'll be playing on my mind once I know it's going to be happening. In terms of the shops, you know, things that really stand out for me and always have done is perfume counters. Absolute bane of my existence in a shop. Cannot stand them. I will do everything actively possible not to go near perfume. You know, it's the smells of cafes as well. It can suddenly just hit me, and obviously I smell it probably a lot quicker than other people will. So I'm trying to escape while other people are still thinking, well, what's wrong, you know, kind of thing. There can be things to do with lights and things like that. Sometimes I have it as well where, so I'm quite tall, I'm 6 foot. So sometimes some ceilings can seem quite small, and then that can really make me feel, and it almost feels then as if there's like background noise. I generally hear electricity. So it can then feel like there's a hum, as if there's lots of pressure then coming in on me. Don't particularly like lifts. But I think, you know, in terms of going forward now, I feel like what's good for me is that I have the opportunity now to turn around and say, actually, this isn't healthy for me. It isn't that I'm just being odd or strange. This just isn't actually healthy, and that's not my fault. It's because of the fact that either it's a business in a situation that's not going to get easy for me. So like as an example, sometimes we have local butchers. Sometimes I'll go in and the smell of blood is just too intense. Now, I don't really think there's anything the butcher can do about that. You know, certainly, you know, there's nothing I can expect them to do. And for me, I don't think I can expect them to change anyway. So I just know, well, if I'm in that situation, I need to turn back around and go somewhere else and, you know, where there isn't that strong smell. So I think, you know, I think overall, it's going to be a lot better now that I have my diagnosis. And I'll know that, as I say, it's not me. And it's not me something to beat myself up about.
No, absolutely, definitely. And if you were to look at your former self, what advice would you give, and to individuals who are in the room or are going to be watching this on demand, for somebody that is really seeing themselves in you today, you know, what advice would you give?
I'd say get a diagnosis, and if somebody discounts you, speak to someone else. You know, obviously going privately was an option that I was able to do. Not everybody's able to be in that position. Just keep trying, keep speaking to somebody, because it's, you know, there is that thing, you know, I mean, I've had it recently where someone said to me, oh, would you have got your vaccines if you knew it was going to make you autistic? And you're just like, oh, and it's the same thing with saying, oh, well, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere. Well, no, you know, and that there is really, and I know some people as well who kind of just self-identify, which if that feels okay for you, then in some ways, you know, sometimes going through the entire, you know, assessment process in itself could be very, very difficult. But if you feel that it would give you more confidence about yourself and understanding about yourself, then for me, in terms of the costs for my mental health as well, just to be able to just feel I can accept myself more, I think it's absolutely worth it. So don't let people just brush you off. Yeah,
no, I think that's a very valid point. And just one more before we finish. With your other hat on, Catherine, as an employer, what advice would you give, or what steps would you take as an employer if one of your employees was going through a similar process that you had?
I think sometimes we're maybe a slightly different employer than a lot of people. What we do is we listen. And I think that's got to be the main thing. It has to be. We're in a position where we are like a company that's based quite a bit on technology. So team members can work from home. They can work in the office with people. There's no requirements to be, you know, taking part in group events or things like that. And we try and make sure, because as well, for lots of people who work with us, they do have a number of different health conditions and things like that. So we never assume anything. So, you know, like if, you know, some people have said, oh, they want to go do rounders on the beach, and the summer it's just like, oh, well, that's all well and good for the people who physically can. So that's positive. What can we do to make sure everyone's involved if we're going to, a lot of you wanting to do that, and things like that. And in terms of socially, you know, it's a case of, well, do you want to come and do this with us, or is this something else? You know, we make sure we get feedback from people a lot. And we're in a position as well, which is really good, is that a lot of people, well, most of the people who work for us, they're very happy to come and chat to me, or my co-director, who's my husband, or the other managers, and just be really open and say, you know what, I actually feel like I might need this right now. And it's a case of, right, well, let's see if we can do it. And I think, you know, it's just so unfortunate that a lot of firms aren't in that position where they have that kind of a culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Open channels of communication and being approachable is key in management, I think, is what we're hearing there. Thank you so much, Catherine. It was extremely valuable, and I'm seeing lots of the chat, and I think lots of other people are echoing my sentiments. Lauren, I think we now have time for some questions. I've seen lots of different comments coming through, but do we have any questions for Debbie and Catherine?
Yeah, so I've gone through lots of the great chats that have been coming through, lots of people saying just thank you and for how much what you've been talking about has resonated with them, and lots of good chat going on. But I've tried to pick out a couple of questions that I think between you, Debbie and Catherine, you could answer for people. So we had one come in from someone saying that they work at a shopping centre. So what could they do to help this be a great place for those with autism?
Shall I
go, Debbie? Yeah, go for it.
I apologise about my sound. I'm going to have a look into that. Thank you for flagging that with me. I think shopping centres always seem to want to play really loud music all the time. And actually, I don't think human beings need loud music all the time. My son really struggles with that. And also we started once having autism hours. They're always like 9 o'clock in the morning. Can we have a few more areas where we can have those specific hours? Because actually, again, that works for our community who haven't had a diagnosis and that think, actually, I don't like it loud in there. So I think shopping centres could just bring that level of music down personally, because that really affects my son.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, Debbie, we've also noticed that with the implementation of quiet hours, where a organisation spreads and gives diversity of timings across the week, they're actually having a lot more engagement and a lot more support from the community, because, you know, who wants to go shopping at 9 o'clock in the morning whenever you've potentially had quite a fraught night before, because we do know that those with autism might struggle with sleeping patterns and so as well. So that's a really good point to highlight.
I also think, just really quickly to pop in there, I think if we turned all the music off in shopping centres, I don't think anyone else would notice. I don't think neurotypical people would go, well, it's really quiet in here, but actually everyone would be really comfortable. I think shopping centres and shops should try it.
Absolutely. Embrace it. Anything else, Lauren?
Yeah, so I noticed another one that I think would be good just to answer as well. So someone's asked, what is the simplest way to explain what it's like to experience life as an autistic person to other people that you don't see regularly but want to be open and honest with?
Ooh, that's interesting. I'm not too sure about that one. I think I'm quite upfront, so I just probably tell people exactly what's happening. I don't think I necessarily tell everybody. I think when I was first diagnosed, I was kind of like telling anyone and everyone, to be honest. It was like, just accept me for who I am. I'm here socially, and this is really hard. So, you know, kind of thing. If I say anything daft, just ignore me. I think it would just be, I try to say to people, like the way that I say it to my kids is just that my brain sees patterns differently. And so it's not that, you know, there's anything massive, you know, I mean, there's massive differences, but I just like to say, you know, there's not like huge differences between us all. It's just the way that you see things, you interpret things, just it goes down slightly different channels in my mind. And that's about the best way I can do it. But I imagine Debbie's got some really good examples of explaining that.
And I think sometimes with neurodiversity, and I don't know how you feel about that, Catherine, but actually it stops people saying, I struggle with this. I think differently. That's it. I think differently. I sometimes think that families they're trying to be helpful by going, oh, there's nothing wrong with them, or all those things that, you know, grandparents come out with. Some family members are trying to understand but use wrong wording, and I think parents sometimes can feel a little bit attacked by that. Why can't he come round and have a party with everyone else? Why can't we have balloons anymore? You know, it's all that kind of stuff. And I think then just having those conversations, as Catherine said, as open, as honest as you can, that you feel comfortable about. And that might be you start by just telling a few people and seeing what that comeback was. Because again, I think a lot of autistic adults have said to me that they want to tell people, but they've had a bad experience, so they'll never tell anyone ever again. So that's what stops them.
Yeah, I think if we've just got time for one more, there's been another good one come in that I think would be good for you, Catherine, from an employer point of view. So someone's asked, is team building important in the workplace, and how do you approach it for your neurodiverse employees?
Oh, I think it is really important. And I think what's quite interesting is for me, I have the personal insight as well. And obviously not to say that my experience is the same as anybody else in my organisation who's neurodiverse, but I know what makes me uncomfortable. And so I'm like, well, there's at least one person here that feels a bit uncomfy about this. So we always put things out in a sense to say to people, like, you know, in terms of we talk about socially and the team building side of things, to say, right, who fancies this? And I think what's important is to remember people who are neurodiverse might not fancy something, but also people who are neurotypical might not fancy something. You know, we've ended up signing up for everybody in July. Well, not everybody, putting it out for people who want to in July for a mid-year meetup for us to all go to a bingo night, which is going to be hosted by Paul Chuckle, and there's going to be lip sync battles, and there's going to be all this different fun on it. Half the team wants to do it, half the team don't, and there's a mixture of neurodiverse in each of those camps. So I think it's important to recognise that people are neurodiverse and to have those open conversations. But I also think it's important not to then overly pigeonhole and go, well, actually, because they're neurodiverse, they don't want to do this, or, you know, this isn't, we can't think of that as a company, because actually it's the whole thing of once you've met one neurodiverse person, you haven't met all of them. So what one person might not like to do because of sensory overload, another person that might not be sort of hitting their sensory flags. So just again, be really, really open. And I think it's always, for me in any case, regardless of whether or not neurodiverse, neurotypical, if you are going to be enforcing a team building session, everybody's going to go there begrudgingly. So I just think that everyone anyway should do it as like an open forum of let's all have a chat about what we'd all like to do.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. I think we've had lots come through, but I'm aware that we have run over. So I'll just hand back to you, Charlene, just to wrap up the session for us.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, everyone. Just to come back on some of the key things that we want to take away today. Autism does refer to a broad range of conditions, and these are characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviours, speech and non-verbal communication. It can be diagnosed at any age, and some adults may never get diagnosed. Autistic adults can utilize their skill set in the workplace, and they have huge value and contribution to the workplace. And there's plenty of adjustments that workplaces can implement to accommodate the needs of the individuals concerned. So just as a summary in terms of our next session, we have on the 3rd of May,
Charlene, you've just put yourself on mute. We can't hear you.
oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Sorry. And then on the 30th of June, we have a session around how we can make our social media accessible. So I just want to say thanks, a huge thanks again to both Debbie and Catherine for their fantastic contribution to today's webinar. And I hope you agree that their insights and their stories have been invaluable to our understanding on autism. And so for all our Purple 365 subscribers, we look forward to welcoming you on the 3rd of May. And for those who are not subscribed as yet, please do feel free to get in touch with me on charlene@purpletuesday.org.uk. Thank you.